that. They need to provide people that are somewhat competent and have had some training on that. But we have to train our people that we hire for whatever activities that we're working on, and that's why that site specific safety plan again is very important. You guys do some hammer drilling into concrete and silica, so that like the exposure control plan, which I do believe we have at least sent you a template on. That's something that we'll need to start looking at and working towards, Dave. I mean, they need a silica exposure control for hammer drilling, which is very straightforward, very simple. It's an integrated shroud on the hammer drill. And if you want to take it a step further, we can do some IH, industrial hygiene sampling for one of your workers. And I'm pretty sure that anytime we're hammer drilling at our feet, waist level or below, will not exceed the permissible exposure limit, and anything above our head would. So then we would only have to use a shroud when we're hammer drilling above our head. There's also time limits and things like that, but I'm really not getting into this new silica standard right now.
So we went to Ramset, we don't have to worry about that.
What's that again?
We went to Ramsets, we don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, so that's all contained, right? Yeah, so you don't have to worry about that at all. You still need to have the plan on site. No. You still have to have a plan too. And that plan is just like it supplements the site specific safety plan, and you just have the guys sign off that they understand that they need to be using a shroud if they're using a hammer drill more than 2 hours in a day.
Which we don't.
Right. But you just have to have it written out, because OSHA's not going to cite us for, actually they're not going to come out and put sampling on you and saying, hey, are you above or below the exposure limit? The new standard, what they're going to cite you on is they're going to cite you on, do you have the required plan, and have you trained your people on the exposures of what silica can do? And so that ECP that we have developed is a very straightforward template, is something that we can do. Anytime you have hammer drills on site, we need to get with you on that. Now, does anybody else work? So you have self-performance, and then who else has self-performance?
Jeremy's got a couple of guys, but you guys won't use hammer drills for you.
No.
They just use hammers. Best drivers. So how do we get around with helicopters? It's all with dust and they water site stuff.
Are you saw cutting while you're using the helicopter?
No, there's just dust on the concrete. So it's just actual concrete.
But you usually just drive over or fly over,
Blow it all out.
and blow it out. Or
Wet
at
down the area.
at First
Normally
Harbor,
way down the
Yeah,
area.
you're supposed to have a water truck, side.
at First Harbor Freight expansion, they got us a sweeper, street sweeper.
The key concept is that each employer should consider the hazard that is in a position to prevent and correct to comply with OSHA standards. So, example, staffing agencies might provide general safety and health training like hazard communication, fall protection, scaffolding, and host employers provide specific training to a particular workplace. We talked about ad nauseum, site-specific safety plans, very important. The key is communication.
So you're saying we are liable and responsible for those temp employees, regardless of what training the temp agency claims that they've got. That's correct.
Yep. And you can be citable for that, and your workers' compensation, depending on the severity of the injury, can be brought into that as well. Because we talked about the retained control. If they didn't provide their own supervisor, competent person, and it's not a subcontractor, they're workers for you, they're supplementing your workforce, then they're your workers.
We went through this a couple weeks ago. In looking into this in terms of liability and all those things came out. So that's why we're not using them until we can come up with a better.
Right. Yeah, and then again, you're the ones hiring them, so make sure that the shit does roll downhill onto them. Put more onus on them. Your guys, this is the job.
Most of their agreements actually exclude any liability.
Safety, right.
And we wouldn't sign it. So.
Well, good for you.
On the communication thing, if we have our competent person and they speak some Spanish,
right,
and the person that gets hired speaks only Spanish, would that competent person not actually count as a competent person because they don't speak fluent Spanish?
So if they speak no Spanish, then probably that would be a problem. You would need to require that temporary workforce to provide a bilingual person in order to be able to communicate effectively. But if they speak some Spanish, I think that you probably, with that limited Spanish and with like hand signals and actions, you can really explain most things. Plus, there's a lot of apps out there right now. You can get around that kind of stuff. You can say, well, I have a translator, but if I need to communicate something very specific, I can put it in my translation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Staffing agencies do have a duty to inquire on the conditions of the workplace. They don't ever do that. And they must ensure that they are sending workers to a safe workplace. They also don't do that. Them being ignorant of a hazard is not an excuse. Neither is it an excuse for us. So it's something that you should pay attention to. Staffing agencies need not become experts on specific workplace hazards, but they have to determine what conditions exist at their host agency, at their host sites. The staffing agency has a duty to inquire. Okay, we talked about that. And just as important, host employers must treat temporary workers like any workers in terms of training, safety, and health protections. Which that's the hardest part for us. Like we have to treat them as one of our own, even though they're only working there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 2 days. Utilizing the site-specific safety plan helps supplement the training requirements, and it can be used as an orientation for personnel or subcontractor personnel on site. Identifies nearest medical facilities, etc. that we can talk about. Okay. Any questions on that? We're going to start rolling pretty quick through some of these actual safety topics, the things that are required by law that you need to be trained on. You guys all have rights as it relates to OSHA. You have a right to a safe and healthy work environment, and you have the right to refuse work if you feel it is unsafe. So do your personnel, your employees, and things like that. If you are told to do something that's unsafe and you refuse to do that and they fire you because of that, that is a wrongful termination case, pretty much. So you do not want to put yourself in a position where you guys as supervisors are telling someone to do something that's unsafe and then them refusing it. They refuse and you have proven and you've trained them, you've done everything and they still refuse and you know that you're making it safe, then that's a completely different case. But do not just tell someone, again, you can be negligent for that. When we talk about hazard communication though, we're talking about chemicals on the job site. We're talking about the SDS folks. And so what you need to make sure is they've turned it from MSDS to SDS, so it's now a safety data sheet and it's all standardized. There's also GHS, the Global Harmonized System, which is all the placarding's the same. So if you get something from China and Australia and it's both poison, you're going to see skull and crossbones on both of those chemicals. You have the right to know what chemicals are imported to your job site, and you can, if your employees request a SDS for a chemical, you must provide that. Similar to your subcontractors, you have to provide SDSs for any of that kind of stuff. So again, we're going to move very quickly through this, but you have a right to know. You have to ensure that hazards, all chemicals produced and imported, are evaluated, and information concerning their hazards is provided to employers and employees. So let's go back to Dylan, for example. If we hired a subcontractor there, we would need to know what chemicals they are bringing to site, and we need to have them supplied SDS. It can be either electronically or in an actual hard binder. We would like for those SDS to be site specific. If you guys are getting into this more and more, I would highly recommend going to a web-based SDS system. It's a subscription service. It's very cost effective, and since everybody has some type of smart capabilities, especially with Procore, when OSHA asks for your SDS, everybody wears a sticker on their hard hat and has a 1-800 number, and you can just call that number and they can pull up any SDS. And then you don't have to worry about what chemicals you can bring any chemical on site because they have a library of those chemicals. So that's something that I would recommend, and Dave can help you set that up. We've done that a few times now for our clients. It's been pretty successful.
So let me ask this. We're up on a roof and we're using adhesive on the roof.
Yep.
And OSHA walks up and says, "Where's your SDS?"
You say, I have it right here for the remote system.
I guess the question is, does the employee have to request it, or do we have to have it available regardless of the request?
You have to have it available regardless of the request.
Okay, so
Most of the time we have to send it to GC's trailer, as part of our snow pack at the beginning.
it's not like that. I've been to one. We have those.
Ever been to one? Yeah, we have safety dashes on all the time.
Are they included the meetings on the roof?
That's so bad.
I'm sorry.
We do not. Just,
And that's-
they have it there for
that's-
the roofers though. Because we bought safety for roofers.
Okay, I think we probably need to address that area.
You do not want to get a citation for hazard communication because it's by far the easiest to avoid. Like I said, those subscription services are incredibly straightforward and simple, and
Can you
especially
forward some of that information
Dave,
to us?
will you make sure you forward, what does Clayco use? Which one?
I gotta look, it's on my hard hat, my truck.
Okay, so, that will do, so give them some information give them 2 different options of the SDS versions, and they're probably, depending, the Clayco version is way more expensive than the one Scott uses. Maybe recommend that, but since they're familiar with the Clayco version, I think that's the way to go. Now you just eliminate all human error.
Basically, every employee would have access to that.
Yep, they can call, they can say, I'm with National Design Build Services, I need to know the PPE required for acetone. And they'll say, well, what's your email, or we can just talk to you over the phone.
Then there's when I say hard hat, there's a sticker that tells you who to call.
Everybody gets a hard hat, the number.
Is that in
24/7.
and of itself adequate? Or does someone have to actually do that prior to work and have it accessible to them?
OSHA has started to accept electronic means sold.
So I guess my point is just the fact that we have that service and we get access to the employees, that's good enough.
As long as the employees understand how to access the service, because during the interview process, they're going to ask, have you had hazard communication training? Yes. Do you know how to read an SDS, and do you know how to access them? Hopefully they would say yes, and if they do, then you're in good shape. So, I still have an SDS, forgive me, but there's 3 parts of that hazard communication system: the program itself, which we have, and we're working with Jeremy on updating the whole program, container labeling, and then the SDS. Hazard communications needs to be available to every employee at all times, which is, that's literally like what OSHA says. So when we have that communication available to them, then it is available at all times. It can be a physical or a health hazard, and then there's 4 ways that chemicals enter the body: ingestion, inhalation, absorption, and injection. This is like needle sticks and different things like that. That doesn't happen very often in construction, nor should it. Absorption does happen way often. This is the most overlooked one. The sheet metal workers working with the acetone, guys have been doing that for years and years. You said you're a former sheet metal worker? How many times have you taken that cloth and acetone barehanded? 0?
I've never used acetone and sheet.
Never used acetone.
No, not once.
They use something. What do you use then?
We use nothing. You talk about for like when they go paint done.
You don't use nothing?
The pookie? We don't use anything.
Double negative.
Double negative.
The cookies.
Okay, well, acetone, my roofers do thin slices, and so these guys are dipping their hand. So on that label, on the SDS, it says carcinogen. What does carcinogen mean? It causes cancer, okay? So like the acetone requires a half-arm PVC PPE glove that is impermeable to chemicals. So absorption is the one that's often overlooked, and then inhalation is the one that often kills people. The acute toxicities, the things that people die from, is typically an inhalation issue, which is maybe CO2, or talk about adhesives. It deprives the air of oxygen, and people start getting a little goofy, and start getting a little sleepy, and then start getting a little dead. And then ingestion. I had my peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and you're doing lead abatement, and I set it down, and I picked up some lead paint chips. I ate the lead paint chips. Probably what happened to me. So you can eat the food. You can eat or drink or ingest a chemical. That's why container labeling is so important. If I have a secondary container, I am allowed to have something in a secondary container as long as I'm using it for that shift, but it has to be labeled. So if I cut the top of this off and put some chemicals in it, I have to take a Sharpie and label it what that is. Okay, so Mountain Dew and green cleaner may look very similar. If I put green cleaner and Mountain Dew, someone could hypothetically drink that. So you have to have it labeled as such. So secondary containers must be labeled. SDS. Oh man, I used my wrong PowerPoint, but that's all right. SDS has a prescribed format. They include potential hazard effects, physical and chemical characteristics, PPE requirements, storage requirements, etc., etc. The most important part about hazard communication is if we have people working on the site that they understand that they need to be trained on it and they have access to the SDS. That whole 1-800 number would solve all of those problems except for the training. And the training in of itself can be something as simple as a toolbox talk that Dave can get to you. I mean, like, probably wouldn't even bill you for a toolbox talk on hazard communication, honestly, it just takes some time. Any questions on chemicals imported to the job site? Okay, I told you this is gonna be quick. We're gonna roll. This is the section I really want to focus on. Okay, maybe emergency, maybe not. Let's see. It's noon. I got 1 hour, and I'm gonna go. Okay, types of falls. Falls from the same level: slips, trips, high frequency rate, low injury severity rate. What's the number one thing that calls slips, trips, and falls that's on the job site? Housekeeping. Housekeeping. Just general housekeeping. If you're walking onto a clean job site, typically you know that somebody is paying attention to things. If you're working on a very dirty, grungy job site, a lot of trash everywhere, you know that you're probably in for an experience. Falls from elevation, when they don't happen as often, but when they do, obviously people get something that you need to consider when you're doing your site audits, when you guys are actually going through, you need to consider free fall distance. This is one of the most overlooked issues within fall protection. Often, do you guys have rope grabs or retractable lanyards for your folks? Do you have any rope grabs? Great. Okay, well, retractables takes this kind of equation out of it. The swing fall, we'll talk about that next, but if we're using rope grabs or any type of system that doesn't self-adjust while we're working, we need to consider free fall. Free fall is the uncontrolled distance between the foot level and when fall rest equipment activates. So if I have a 50-foot rope grab, and I have my anchor point back here, and let's say this end of this table is the edge, and I'm right here and I'm working, and I'm 25 foot up in the air, and I have 10 foot, and I have 40 feet of slack, and I fall, what's happening? I'm hitting the ground, and the rope's kind of spinning on my dead body, okay? I did have a guy fall 3 stories about a month ago, and he broke an elbow. That's it. 3 stories on the sidewalk, broken elbow. Lucky. Free fall distance needs to be considered. We need to take the slack out of that rope system so we have no more than 6 foot. When we talk about fall arrest systems activating, we're talking about the actual shock absorption pack starting to rip out. While that can rip out up to 3.5 feet, as soon as that activates, that's what the 6 foot free fall distance is referencing to. The retractable in and of itself, typically when people fall in retractables, it grabs so quickly that oftentimes we don't even know people fell because they're able to reach back and grab the edge of whatever they fell off and climb themselves back onto.
Just a little bit,
Yep.
because we got some very new folks here.
Mhm.
They probably don't know the difference between a retractable or
Okay.
rope grab or.
Should have brought my goodie bag. I had show and tell stuff. But okay, a rope grab. So a personal fall arrest system consists of 4 different things. It consists of an anchor point. So I install an anchor point. It has to be capable of sorting 5,000 pounds of force. Now, we do not have to have Mr. Smarty McPants here engineer an anchor point for us. We need just to make sure it's called a non-certified anchor. We, as the common person, our people on site, need to ensure that I have considered this anchor point as acceptable that could support 5,000 pounds. Typically, we're looking at something that would hold an S10 pickup truck. It's the force of fall. And the reason for that is I have a slide coming up.
That will explain to the younger folks what an S10 is.
They don't make S10s anymore? Smaller pickup truck. Then we have some type of device that is, so we have our rope grab, and then we have our anchor point, and then we have our attachment device, either a rope grab or a retractable. A rope grab is what it kind of sounds like. It has a D-ring. I have all this in the slide, so let me just, so a rope grab would hook to the anchor point. It's a double locking snap hook. It's always hook to ring, and then the rope is a 50-foot rope. On there, it has a grab, and the grab itself operates through actual friction or force. And so when there's a fall, the grab itself puts your body weight against the rope and closes that tooth device into the rope, and it stops you from falling. There is a bit of a slippage that could occur, but that is something that stops you pretty quickly. And then part of a rope grab system, you have to have a shock absorbing component to it, meaning a 200-pound guy, which that's not me, but 200-pound guy falling 6 feet puts 2,400 pounds of pressure on your body. That's a significant amount of pressure. The shock absorbing systems that we have available to us limit that to less than 900 pounds. Why is that important? Back in the 80s and the 90s, early 90s, we had body belts, number 1, which is just stupid, and I'll show you what those used to look like, to snap in people's backs all the time. But number 2, we didn't have shock absorption, in which people were falling, and the force of the fall literally would result in internal injuries, meaning your organs would be ripped. Yeah, ripped in half, exactly. And you could get severe kidneys, livers, and different things that could happen. I mean, you can talk about internal injury, but it would mess people up. And in fact, they used to allow chains as a system of fall protection, which would just, I mean, you fall, I mean, you're hit hard, 2,400 pounds of pressure. Imagine that. So when we talk about shock absorption, that has to be a component of all of the systems. What's nice about the retractables, imagine your seatbelt. Remember, you know how you pull it out in the wheel and it you can let it go and retractable system has that same capability, but when you fall, some of the guys hate it because, and I've done this before, I've been tied off and you walk just a little too fast, you end up flat on your back. Because once it hits a certain speed, it locks up and it prevents your fall. Now, it does also have a shock absorbing component to it, and that's why we always recommend that shock absorption packets and retractables aren't compatible with each other. Because technically, when you fall, if you fall hard enough, technically that thing will kind of rip out of it. It will rip out just a little bit further. Like now, me and you, if you had a retractable and I had the other end of it, and I pulled on it, we would never be able to see that shock absorption in because we're just not strong enough. The force of the fall is, unless you can lift 2,400 pounds or something. Do you have a retractable in your truck?
No.
Alright. Okay, so those, and then the full body harness is the next component of the system. And the full body harness needs to be worn properly. For the guys in here, you don't want your leg straps, well, even gals, I mean, you don't want your leg straps hanging below your boys, because if you fall with a strap that's low and it comes up on you, 2,400 pounds of pressure, or even 900 pounds of pressure, you're Mickey Mouse at that point. When somebody does fall, there's something called harness syndrome, and it can cut off the blood flow of your femoral artery. The whole soldiers fainting when they're standing at attention things, the locked legs. Same system, it's the same concept, which is the blood pools in your hips and below your head, and your head does not get enough brain. You pass out, and within 20 minutes, technically, you could die. So there's a variety of systems for that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Personal fall arrest system is anchor, connector, shock absorption, harness. That make sense? So free falling, only 12 feet, you're hitting at 20 miles per hour, and you hit less than 1 second. I always tell people that, so let's use Troy as an example. Troy, $100. Would you jump? I mean, yeah, look at this. $100, would you jump from 12 feet, onto grass off of a roof for $100? Yeah, he would. Okay, so I wouldn't. I don't think if my knee sucks. And Jillian, I don't recommend it either right now. But a lot of people would take that bet. But my point is, you are not jumping. You are falling. And when people are falling, you are not a cat. You are not nimbly jumping from tree to tree. You are not orientating yourself in the air to where you can hit the ground in the manner you want to hit the ground. So 12 feet, 20 miles per hour, same bet, 20 miles per hour, but you jump head first. Okay. So my point is, when people are falling, they're not able to pay attention to how they're orientating themselves in the air. That 12 feet distance is very hard to tie off on, honestly. We talked about, unless we have a retractable. The rope grab system, I'm 6 foot tall, almost. And if I fall and I don't have an anchor point above me, which we always want to try to have, but if I don't have an anchor point above me and it's on my foot level, I fall, that's another 6 feet. I almost need to go to a restraint system. I'll talk about the difference between fall arrest and fall restraint in just a minute. Free fall distance should be limited to a few feet so as to prevent injury from grade, obstructions, and then swing fall distances. So when we're talking about, where's my swing fall? All right. I got it. It's coming up. But swing fall is a big deal for you guys because you're working off retractables. That is all about anchor positioning. So if my anchor point was here in this circumstance and the same roof edge or hole, this is a hole that I'm working on, and I'm right here and I'm directly behind, I fall, what happens? I fall, harness catches me, I'm in good shape. Now the problem is, if that anchor point's the same spot, and I decide that I'm going to be working over here, and I fall, what's happening, guys? I'm swinging back into something. And I'm not swinging my swing's not necessarily going to stop right here. There's no like X-Men, Magneto, wall, whatever stopping me. I'm going to swing into maybe something like an I-beam or an acid tank or a power line. Those things we need to consider. You need to consider things that are around your swing fall hazard. So an appropriate way to, and I'm going to stop right there actually before I do that. The reason I have the anchor point set back here, and honestly I want it up above me, or ideally, somewhere around here. But what I want to avoid is installing an anchor point. The further back that you have it, the better off you are as far as if you're working along long run of work. Because if I install it right here and I go this way, my swing fault is much greater than if it was back a bit. And for a rope grab system, as soon as I get, if I'm installing it right on the edge, as soon as I get 6 feet or more away, my free fall is already busted. I'm already over the 6 foot free fall allowable distance, if that makes sense. Because if I'm back here, the edge of the roof is kind of catching it, or the edge of the system. Something that also retractors are good for you guys because you guys are working with sheet metal and openings that have sharp edges. Those are much more resistant to cuts and scrapes than a rope grab would be. A rope grab could easily cut. Housekeeping prevents falls, tools, materials, debris, liquids. If you're working around snow or ice, you have to make sure that that's cleared and cleaned off before you work at heights. Between 250 and 300 workers are killed each year from falls, which is a pretty big number. We've actually kind of reduced that since the slides were created, but more than 100,000 are injured as a result of falls. Falls is by far my biggest pet peeve. That's the one thing where I will kind of turn into like not the nice safety guy. I will kind of get shitty, and people will start seeing kind of like I take this stuff seriously. This is important to me. I've had people fall, and I know what it can do to the people and families and how that affects folks. Fall protection is an emphasis program for OSHA. OSHA does not have to have a pre-programmed inspection form to come to your site if they see someone working at heights that is not wearing fall protection. You were in the aerial lift earlier, Max? Okay, so I don't need to have a special like ticket, like address here, da 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 da. If I'm OSHA and I'm driving by and I see you, I can turn my car in and I can open an investigation on National Design Build for you not wearing your harness immediately. Also, Betty can be driving by. She can take a picture of you. She can send that to OSHA. OSHA can open a case on you. Fall protection is an emphasis program, and it's the most commonly used emphasis program because we are the most easily seen when we are working at heights. Roofs, towers, aerial lifts, those types of things. That makes sense, right? I mean, if we're in the interior of the building, oftentimes the public is not able to see us. The Indy Star building, for example, that we're working on, have had OSHA there 10 times, 12 total, just because of looky-loos, taking pictures of things that they think that is unsafe, and then OSHA showing up because they're assholes.
Disgruntled employees are also a big source of.
And we've had inside jobs where we have had pictures taken and sent to OSHA where we know that somebody was on site taking these pictures. And they were taking pictures in such a way that it looked like it was a hazard, but just based on the angle, but in actuality, when it was investigated, it ended up not being a hazard, like pins missing from scaffold systems. They took it just perfect where the pins were in line with the post, things like that. So I've dealt with it all. I'm definitely ready for that project to be over with, just personally, just because I'm sick of it.
Another question real quickly.
Yeah.
OSHA has programs where you can sign up as a contractor and participate. So they'll come out and they'll actually come to your job site, visit your job site, and then without citing you, they'll tell you what you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
Is that something that's, is that something
We've
you
done it.
recommend for us, or?
I really don't recommend it for you. Because you're inviting OSHA onto a project. For number one, you have to get permission from a general contractor. They're probably not going to want that. They're bringing the non-enforcement side onto the site, and they cannot cite you for the issues that they find. But you have to. But they can, if you don't fix the stuff, which you would be able to do, or if they have a certain opinion on how you do things, you have to do it their way. And also the paperwork on the front end, which we would handle for you, is just an absolute beast and bear. I mean, it's insane. And they're there, and then you have to have a meeting. You're sitting in probably an hour to 2 hours extra meetings every 2 weeks. So you're having a 2-hour meeting every 2 weeks. So it's just.
So it wouldn't ingratiate ourselves to our general contractor.
I don't, unless your general contractor specifically requests that, I would not think that. I think, selfless plug here, I think a third-party safety consultant ingratiates you more to a general contractor than that.
Someone's going to send reports to them.
Right. Blame Dave for that. He did. OSHA has determined that there is no safe distance. Okay, so if I'm on a roof and I have 3 acres of roof, there is no safe distance between that edge of the roof and me that would would make fall protection unnecessary. Now, there is a thing called de minimis violation, meaning it's so unlikely that someone could get and go and fall off the edge of the roof. Like, let's say I went up a roof hatch and I'm literally 300 feet on either direction, like, and OSHA's trying to cite me for that. I can come in there and say, listen, I understand that this technically is a violation of OSHA rules because there's no distance that would make it unnecessary, but prove the hazard to me. Because the burden of proof is on OSHA when they're citing you. They have to prove that there's an actual hazard to an employee or a personnel in order for them to cite us for something. And so their proof is, there is no proof this guy could wander off 300 feet away from his work area and fall off the edge. Okay, well, then this is de minimis, and I would like you to classify that as such. A de minimis is pretty much a non-bow as far as your record. Doesn't even think it shows up on your search, your establishment search online. Which, by the way, anybody can go and search National Design Build Services on OSHA's.gov website and pull up any citations that you've had in the past 5
It's
years.
also unprotected areas too, so you have parapet wall with a protected edge, that then you don't have to be.
Right.
Here.
And I wrote an article on parapet walls because that's one of the most commonly misunderstood fall protection issues, which is those parapet walls still have to meet the 39-inch minimum guardrail height for fall protection, and then in addition to, a jury has found that, don't tell your guys this, but they have found that a wall that is at least 29 inches high and 18 inches wide, I think 29 and 18 inches wide is just as safe as a 39-inch parapet wall, or maybe it's 30 and 18. But that's like they went to court to prove that stuff. And you don't want, I mean, we don't want to be the guinea pig for that kind of thing. But parapet walls will serve as fall protection. Also, our control systems that we have in place, warning lines, signs, signals, barricades, things that are approved, we can talk about. So creating a site-specific fall protection plan will help decide what fall protection is needed and where, which is included in the site SSP. We always want to barricade the area below any type of working at heights, not just scaffolds. Use panels or screens or toe boards if we have just material on the ground. If we're stacking material up above a hole where things can fall, we need to use like a snow fence, like the orange screen, to prevent material from falling. And then, or you can build a canopy or erect a net, which is very rare. Have you guys ever done? You've never probably done that. Employees must be. So the number one rule of fall protection in construction is anything over 6 feet is considered at heights, and you then need to have fall protection. Does Clayco or anybody else go above and beyond that and say the 4-foot rule?
We have a contractor right now, a Canadian company that's requiring
4-foot rule.
Oh, wow. And ladder permits.
That's fun.
Yeah.
So I have a problem with that a little bit, just as a safety professional. They require you to be tied off when you're working on an 8-foot ladder or whatever. But like in order to get the tie-off point, you have to go up like 20 feet just to set the anchor point, which is in and of itself more dangerous than just working off a ladder correctly. But I won't bore you with my issues with other safety people. Okay. All right, so we talked about personal fall arrest system. That is PPE. That is the last line of defense of protection. A guardrail would be considered an engineered solution. Okay, I have engineered the potential of fall out of the issue, and I have installed a barricade that does not allow my people to fall unintentionally through an opening. A safety net, again, isn't used unless you're on high-rise things. And then we have warning line systems. Now, I have safety monitor on here. It's a common misconception that all trades can use a safety monitor. You cannot. You have to be a roofer to use a safety monitor, and therefore that is not applicable. But a warning line is applicable, and what that is it's a non-conventional means of fall protection, and it's a barricade. It's a visual identifier of where the edge is going to be. For non-roofing trades, how far does that warning line have to be set back from a leading edge? 15 feet. Okay, you guys do that. Good for you. Everybody else says 6. I mean, you guys, the Clayco and all that, they've built that into, which is good. You guys use warning lines quite often?
We do now.
Okay, so you use the 15 lines set around the leading edge, but you also need to set your lines around any type of controlled decking zones, CDZs. So if you're cutting an opening within a deck on a roof, you would then classify that as a potential fall, and you would set your lines 15 feet back. And I would recommend taking one step further and just posting signs, fall protection required beyond this point. Just staple them to it, and then having your competent person be there and available to not allow any unauthorized personnel into that area. Holes have to be covered. This opening can be made safe by using a guardrail or a strong cover. The requirements for covering a hole are the following: 2 times the intended load. Marked as cover or hole or danger hole. And then what are those? Anything to secure the hole from accidental displacement. That is the requirement of a hole cover. Also, so sometimes we can't penetrate the surface that we're working around. So I tell guys oftentimes, if I have a hole that's the square on this carpet here, I can measure, let's say 12. I can measure a 23-inch piece of 2x4, cut it off, fasten it to my cover, set it on there, and I've kind of chalked it up where it now can't be displaced. Does that make sense? So, can you borrow this? So this is my cover, and my hole is the size of this cover. I take this water bottle, it's a 2x4, fasten it to the bottom, put that on the hole. So now, if I kick this cover, this 2x4 is going to kind of grab the thing. So if I can't make penetrations, then that's an option for you. Just remember, it has to be secured from accidental displacement, not intentional displacement. That's the most important. And it does have to be marked as cover or hole. For your grape system that Dave explained to me, again, that if it's on a different working level, if this is great and I have intentionally stepped over 19 inches to get up there, then that is not considered. That's considered fall protection and not a cover per se. You don't necessarily have to label that. If working for Clayco, you may want to go the extra step and actually label that just to be on their good side. But
now, what about this scenario where we pull a old rooftop unit off the roof, leave the curb there, I put plywood over it, then I put a sheet metal cap. We don't have to mark that with hole, do we?
You put the sheet metal cap. Is that the final product?
Yes.
No. Temporary, any type of temporary cover. That plywood. So if you put the plywood on there and then left it, then that would need to be marked. If the sheet metal cap is your permanent system, then you're done. You do not need to mark it as cover.
Only if it's temporary.
Only if it's temporary and someone can walk through. And when I say 2 times the intended load, you need to pay attention to what other subcontractors are using. If there's aerial lifts on site or roof buggies or something else, and you think that there's a potential for them to be going over your hole covers, that hole cover needs to be substantial enough to withstand 2 times the intended load. Also, considerations that need to be made for hole covers are the size of the hole. If I take 3/4 inch plywood and I set it over a hole that's 1, 2, 3 3x3 squares, and I put plywood just over the top of it, and my fat ass stands in the middle of it, what's happening? And I jump once. I'm going I'm going through it, right? So I need to put 2x4s or 2x6s. I need to have some additional support underneath the actual cover itself in order to maintain this 2 times the intended load. So you need to factor in the span of the actual hole and the support structure beneath it. Any questions on that? Okay. Next one. Roof openings and floor openings. If I need to access a roof or deck opening and I want to make sure that I have access, I would want to have signs here, but I need to make sure that there's an intentional turn, meaning I need to make a 90-degree turn. So if my hole cover is in this area right here and that table is extended all the way through, this right here would be an acceptable barricade as long as my hole wasn't right here. If it was set back, offset a little bit, so I would have to make an intentional 90-degree turn into the work area. Now, Clayco and those people, they're going to say 100% just go under the lines and things like that, but if I'm building a guardrail system and I need an entrance, so I'm not climbing up and over the guardrail system, I need to have a corral for me to kind of come into the area. And then I'd also recommend a sign right at the entrance of the corral that says fall protection required beyond this point. Whenever there's a change in elevation 19 inches or more, there needs to be steps. For roof access, it's oftentimes, you mentioned parapet walls. Oftentimes, we'll have a ladder access. It'll be extended 3 runs past. It'll be secured, and I'll get off the ladder, step on the parapet wall, and then what do I have to do? Jump down. Okay, you need to provide your personnel with steps or an additional ladder. That's very hard to do. I have gone to the point where I always ask for permission rather than forgiveness, especially when I'm working with large GCs that have their own ideas on safety, but I ask if I can set a step ladder parallel to the parapet wall, fasten the step ladder to the actual wall itself so it can't kick out. And so I use that as I get on the parapet wall, and then I grab the step ladder, and then I kind of go down that way. That's my way around that. Or sometimes we just get our carpenters involved, or we ask a favor from someone, and we build an actual step system. Housekeeping. Components of a guardrail. Post, 8 foot max. Now, that is a best practice. So in the standard, it doesn't actually say 8 foot max, but in the appendices of the 1926.502 Fall Protection Standard, it does have an 8 foot max recommendation. The reason for that is our guardrails, when they're set at 42 inches, they need to be able to support 200 pounds of outward and downward force. If we have a 16 foot max and we have 2x4s nailed together in between that, and I go right to the middle and I push on them, there's no way the 200 pounds is going to be met. So 8 foot max vertical post for any type of fall protection guardrail system. 200 pounds, and then 150 pounds for the mid-rail, outward and downward force. Toe boards, typically 4 inches, but the requirement is 3.5 inches by OSHA. 42 inches is what I said for guardrails, but they give you a little bit of exemption, plus or minus 3. When we're on a roof system, something that you need to consider is if you're working, you're typically there before the roofers, but sometimes you're there after, maybe. Sometimes your guardrail system that you installed or someone else installed is built on from the deck level up, but then the roofers come up and they put this tapered system on, and they build it up like 16 inches. All of a sudden, your guardrail system's down here, or your parapet wall is down here. That's not adequate. You have to figure out a different solution or system. Have you guys ever invested or looked into a Raptor fall protection cart?
Good looking out.
I
written them now.
highly recommend those. Renting, using, guys like them, people use them, they need to be trained in it, but that is a very, very, very good system for efficient fall protection. If you have a large run or span where you need to move anchor points often, it's a very, very good system. I've been very happy with that, especially holding up against OSHA and also actually witnessing a fall of someone that was caught by that. I mean, those things work on concrete deck. I mean, that's how cool they are. And I have videos of that and everything else. But we're talking about roof deck, parapet walls, stern engine. We're going to talk about this. Talk about the 2,400 pounds of pressures. Anchor points, once again, I say 5,000 pressures. So that's a safety factor of 2, approximately. I know my math's a little off, but it's approximately a safety factor of 2 for 5,000 pounds. Here's some different systems. So anytime we're hooking up to a structural component, we need to make sure that we're always hooked to ring. Sometimes we have, do you guys use beamers at all for any of your runs? No. So iron workers have a thing called a beamer, but I won't get into that. But we always are looking for hook to ring, meaning we need to have some type of choker system that goes around a structural component that has 5,000 pounds of force that has a ring to it. Because the hook itself is a double locking snap hook and it's compatible with that ring. Where guys get in trouble is they will wrap their hook, their rope or their lanyard around a structural component and hook it back up to the component, the rope or the wire itself, and that is incompatible and can cause issues with fall protection. This is a butterfly anchor or a steep slope roof anchor. A lot of people use it for flat applications. Technically,
We use those the most.
you use these a lot, and oftentimes they're on a flat roof, correct? So you need to make sure that your guys are using the correct amount of screws or more than the correct amount of screws. So you're typically probably just going into the corrugated steel, correct? So you need to pay attention to that, and I would recommend reading the manufacturers or sending Dave your specs on your anchor points and just making sure that we're using the right screws, we're using the right amount of screws, and that people know what that is. Because it does get different depending on the gauge of the corrugated deck. But we use these. This is very, very common. They also need to be orientated in a certain way, but it's a 5,000 pound force. We have to make sure that the deck is fully fastened, and there's some things that need to go into that, but this is a very common. What is this right here? Jillian, what is this? I said hook to ring. Hula hoop, right? Here's a beamer, retractable. These are really nice. These are really nice for what you're trying to do. Like that may be a consideration as you guys move forward. I really like these because they're actually designed for the corrugated steel. These technically, we allow it, and we've been able to prove that they're able to hold. But if you get a system that's technically designed for the deck, then you're kind of much less out of the eye of OSHA and of your owners. And then there's the roof carts. That's an old system. That's a counterweight system. They've gotten away from that. They've gone to the Raptor system. And then there's permanent systems that are on rails that you don't really see much unless you're working for an established facility. So we already talked about shock absorption. So I'm going to kind of go through this. But here's what a rope grab looks like. We talked about rope grabs earlier. They're vertical. They've gotten away from using rings that are this large because what people were doing is the towers or people climbing vertically, they were getting so frustrated that the rope grab was grabbing them as they were ascending that they would grab onto the ring and leave it open, and they climb it up, and then when a fall did occur, the natural human response is to kind of white knuckle it, and if you have that ring open or squeezed, the teeth are disengaged, and therefore you would fall until you let go of that ring. So there was a fatality or something came across that, and that's why they got rid of it. You won't see rings this big much more. And you also, most of these now are self-integrated into the rope grab systems, but there's still some of them where you can actually unscrew the grab, and if you wanted to, you can put it on backwards. If you put it on backwards, the teeth are never going to engage. So they always have up on the arrow point or anchor. So up in your vernacular should be anchor. Retractable lanyards, choker systems, different things that we use for that. Double locking snap hooks are required. You're not allowed to use any type of carabiner. Does anybody have a carabiner on their book bag or anything? Just one snap, right? Well, in safety or OSHA, you have to have double locking, meaning 2 points of contact in order for to open that hook or carabiner. There's an example of non-compliant and compliant. Double locking, 1 point of pressure, 2 point of pressure, 1, 2. And recently, within the past 5 years, all these double locking snap hooks, this gate now can also support 5,000 pounds. They've strengthened this gate because again something happened where the gate failed, even though it was a compliant system. Here's an example of why they got rid of body belts. They got rid of body belts a while ago. You fall, you put the 900 pounds of pressure, it's just going to snap your back. The body harness in and of itself now catches you and holds you in an upright, while uncomfortable position. Has anybody hung in a harness? You have from training or from actual falling? Okay, so mine was also training. So I did the train tower climbing certification, which is a really cool thing. I got to descend 70 feet from a tower and like hook up to a guy. Right? Anyways, but it's very, very uncomfortable. It is, and so what I always say is, if somebody were to fall, you need to make sure that your guys know how to make them the most comfortable possible, and also to prevent harness syndrome. So there are little packets that you can buy that guys can hook on their harness, and it drops a little foot thing that you can stand in to release the pressure of the femoral artery. But typically we won't have those things, and so what we just tell folks to do is grab an extension cord, grab whatever you have available, make sure that you're tied off, number one, tie a loop into that, throw that on the other side, have them put their foot in it, and you hold pressure on it so they can stand up until rescue can arrive. Meaning they can continue to push against some form of, in Indianapolis, we had 2 window washers get stranded 2 or 3 years ago on a very high rise. So we had the capabilities, our fire department has the capabilities of getting to them, but it was going to take some time. And what you saw on the news is they were pushing against the window, and people were like, what are they doing? Well, what they're doing is they're trying to relieve the pressure of their harness, holding them off. They're trying to relieve the pressure of the femoral artery. And so your folks, and we can include that in the site-specific safety plan, we have rescue procedures, and we can include that fact that the harness syndrome sets in, make sure that they have some form of relief.
A lot of our guys have them. They went and bought them themselves.
The little straps. Okay, I really like those. Hold on a second. Okay. So we talked about free fall distance. Anytime you're working on top of the hardest time to tie off compliantly is in that, well, certainly 5 feet, like 4 feet, like that's like. Is anybody here less than 4 foot tall? No. Well, does that make any sense?
Right.
So So the hardest part though is from that 6 to 14 foot range. Anytime I have a 6 to 14 foot range, I need to consider whether I'm in fall arrest or fall restraint. Fall arrest means I get to this edge and I can fall, and I am caught from falling at before 6 foot, before my fall arrest foot range. Fall restraint is completely different, and that's why the rapid fire is also very nice. Fall restraint is I am on a leash, and so I physically cannot get to the fall. You cannot use fall restraint with retractables because they variable, so you have to use a rope system or some type of rope system in order to use fall restraint. The hard part with fall restraint is constant adjustments are needed. So remember my anchor point's over by Dave's feet. Right here, I'm good, and I got myself, I can do my work on the edge. As I walk this way, let's say Dave's right here now. As I walk this way, I'm walking further away, my anchor point's going to slowly pull me away from the edge. So I'm going to have to give myself some more slack to get back to the edge, to get back to restraint. Now the problem is when I walk back and I get back to here, I'm now in a fall arrest situation and maybe my anchor point's not sufficient enough, or if I were to fall and I'm 6 foot tall and my shock absorption is going to rip out 3.5 feet, I may hit an obstruction or something. I may hit the ground if it's like 9 foot high, because I'm falling and I have 4 foot of slack, 3.5 foot of rip out, plus my feet and my height, then I'm hitting the ground. So it's really hard. So sometimes if you get in a really big pickle and the GPC's like, you need to tell us how you're going to tie off on this 10 foot height, we'll write a blurb that talks about fall restraint. The hardest part though is getting the guys to buy into that fall restraint and getting those guys tied off on that. So we would typically recommend a guardrail or an engineered system. Swing fall. Anchorage connectors, again, we want to really avoid connecting anything through the hook through like a beam hole or like a rigging hole. We want to avoid wrapping it back on one another, and we want to avoid, even though this doesn't have an edge, we want to avoid hooking up to like any type of pipe structure that can easily be broke. We need to make sure that those anchor points can withstand about 5,000 pounds, of course. Your guys need to be able to do harness inspections. This right here is a very typical, very cheap type of harness, but anytime your damage gets past this black line, that is a no longer good harness. Anytime there's 2 or more stitches pulled in like a back D-ring component, that's no longer compliant, and then anytime you see colored threads, burns, or if you hold your harness up to the sun and you can see any pinpoints of sun through it, that means the harness is no longer good. Did you buy DBI Sol or Miller? Do you remember which one harnesses you bought for those guys?
I don't have to look it up.
That's all right. Probably one of those. I'm guessing it's one of those 2 systems. But the better harness that you buy for your folks sometimes really does increase productivity, because these really cheap ones, the ones you buy in a bucket at Walmart, people get pissed off and they take them off and they let the leg straps sag, and it just causes more issues. I'm not saying go and buy the $350 harness, but the between the $150 and $250 range is pretty good piece of equipment. Okay, this is the harness syndrome. So when you're sitting there, this is the ideal rescue and evacuation. We would like to have rescue team within 10 minutes or 3 to 13 minutes. When they rescue team sizes up, prepares to initiate rescue, and then rescue team reaches the rescue patient. So when there is a rescue situation, we do allow crew-led rescue, but like rescuing Jeff and rescuing me, crew-led, is going to be a completely different experience for the guys on site. You 2 guys, do you think you could pull Jeff back up to the roof via just a rope and just pure manpower?
Well, then he's gonna catch on the edge and everything.
Right. We don't want to really do that, right? So we want to use like an aerial lift or a forklift or aerial lift or scissor lift or a ladder to get this guy back up. What we don't want to do if we're using a ladder is we don't want to get Jeff on that ladder and say, Jeff, okay, unhook your safety and come on down. Because Jeff could be in shock, or he could be, and as he's climbing down, he could lose balance, and then he could have a fall, and this time he's unhooked, and so he could be severely hurt. If there's a rescue and we're using ladder rescue, we always want to bring the individual back to the platform that he fell from to make sure that he's okay to get down or to be rescued. Does that make sense? An aerial lift, if you can get them on the floor of the aerial lift, you can lower him down that way. That's obviously acceptable.
If you're doing that though, keep in mind that you need to bring an extra means of connection point in the aerial lift and tie him off to the aerial lift before you unhook him from the device that he fell from.
100% tie off. That would still apply. In rescue situations, there is some leeway on, like technically, if Jeff's being rescued, and my only way to get him back up to the roof is a crane headache ball, I can tell Jeff, hey, grab on the headache ball and we'll lift you back up to the roof. I mean, rescue, they do allow, there's some, but Clayco probably wouldn't allow that. I mean, like things like that, but OSHA does allow extraneous circumstances. It's like firefighters. Anybody volunteer or anybody like that in here? Well, those guys break OSHA rules all the time. Okay, but that's because it's in a rescue situation. Warning lines, non-roofing work, 15 foot. Roofing work, 6 foot. If you're using mechanical equipment in your roofer, you have to have it back 10 foot, but we're going to talk about that. You do have to use the appropriate stanchions. They have to be capable of withstanding 16 pounds of tripping force, and warning lines must have a minimum tensile or breaking strength of 500 pounds. When you're buying warning lines, you really should not be using danger tape or caution tape. That's unacceptable. You really should be using the roofing type flags. Is that what you're seeing?
We are now, yes.
Okay, so just use the roofing flags. They have a tensile strength. They're almost kind of hard to cut with a pocket knife sometimes. Not too difficult. Difficult for me, but not for Mr. Wood Chopper over there. Or no, Woodworker. Woodworker is much more appropriate. Each line shall be rigged and supported in such a way that its lowest point, including sag, is not less than 34 inches. What we ask for you guys to do is maintain that sag. That should be a first thing up. Like, if I'm using a warning line system, have one guy just go around the system and straighten things out. Get it taut, get it looking right. It's going to look, one, look good for your customer. Number two, it's going to keep you within compliance. No employee allowed in the area between the warning line and the leading edge without proper fall protection, which I'm sure we understand.
If we didn't erect that warning line system in the first place, you don't want us straightening it and putting it back together.
Well, so is the other trade up there at the time?
With the general contractor required to put it up first.
Yeah. So honestly, so that is not a safety. That's not like a guardrail. That's actually I'm okay with you all not necessarily adjusting, but tightening it up to make sure it's compliant, especially if there's no one else to communicate that with. You could say, I would definitely recommend you communicating that to the general contractor, saying, hey, we've been having to maintain these. Is this something you want us to pay us for, or should we add this to our contract, or is this something that you want to maintain, or maybe not?
It's just a liability if you touch the glass.
If it's just
if you start owning it,
right.
If
it's just us up there, then I think that's okay. If there's multiple trades, then maybe we look at that liability. We certainly don't want to set up warning lines for other trades to use unless they sign kind of a waiver of liability, and that gets really hard because now we're talking about a whole nother step to working with folks, and people don't want to get into that. So that is that's a gray area. I'll say that. If I am receiving material, I cannot use a warning line system as fall protection unless I am actually inside that 15-foot range, which is going to be very difficult to do. So typically, anytime I'm receiving material, that would require 100% fall protection, including also trash and debris, those types of things. Safety monitoring. We always want to have an access point from the ladder to the warning line system if we're using a ladder on the exterior of the project.
Or stair tower.
Or stair tower.
Got anything on roof buggies? Because we're starting to see those a lot more.
Yeah.
We're borrowing them a lot more.
You're using the so those are ballast roofs that you're seeing those on.
Yeah.
So on ballast roofs, when they're using roof buggies, it's called mechanical equipment. So because it has some type of automated, like the machine, they have to pull their lines back a certain distance, from 6 to 10.
And we've actually been seeing even on TPO roofs, they've been using
Four-wheelers.
now like hydrostatic tractors.
Oh.
Throw them on the roof and pull them.
Surprised engineers allow them to do that, but I've seen four-wheelers. In fact, I have four-wheelers on a couple of my projects right now to haul material around acres and acres of, these huge roofing projects. So for you guys, it's still the 15-foot. If you're using mechanical, yeah. All right, ladder safety. This is very basic, but if you follow manufacturer's instructions, the way that OSHA looks at it is you need to use the ladder in which it was intended to be used. And if I, as a safety consultant and as somebody that works for general contractors quite a bit, if I wrote a ticket for For $5, every time I saw somebody use a step ladder improperly leaned up against something, I'd be pretty rich. So using those ladders, oftentimes it's laziness. Oftentimes they have plenty of room to extend the ladder correctly and use it in the correct manner. Sometimes it's not. Technically, if you're using a ladder and it's leaning against it, it needs to be an extension ladder and it needs to have the proper safety feet. Use common sense. The cross bracing, this ladder that's pictured is designed for both sides to be stepped on. But typically, the struts on one side are going to be much less significant. It's going to be pretty obvious on which side you're supposed to be using. And again, Jillian, are you allowed to step on this? I'm picking on you. What's your name?
Abby.
Huh?
Abby.
Abby, are you allowed to step on this step? Good answer. Do you know that? And then obviously the top step. So a lot of guys, they'll be like, well, they always say, I thought it was the top. No, it's these top two. And then the drywall benches the guys use, if they're taller than 30 inches, they're considered a step ladder, so therefore they cannot be on top of those. But we don't hire drywall subcontractors, so we don't really need to enforce that. So we get a lot of entries every year from people ascending or descending improperly, failure to secure ladder, structural failure of the ladder itself. So if I'm inspecting a fiberglass ladder, what is one of the main things that I'm looking for?
Cracked feet.
Cracked feet and sun bleaching damage. There is a point where those ladders get run in the sun so often that they have become damaged from the UV, and they are too brittle to be used, and they need to be thrown away. So that's something. Metal ladders, I hate them. They are still allowed. As soon as there's one little crease in that ladder is no good because it has a much more, has the ability to crease easier, if that makes sense. Okay, have you ever broken a green branch from a tree? Okay, once you kind of get it cracked, then you can start working it back, because metal ladders are kind of a similar circumstance. They can really fold over pretty quickly if there's a crease in any type of system. And then wood ladders should not be used anymore in this day and age. They do still make them, though. They do still make them. Warner still makes them. Carrying objects in hands. You guys have all drove through your neighborhoods. You've seen the roofers carrying a big stack of shingles on their shoulders. That's something that we cannot allow our people to do. If we need to carry things up and down ladders, we should have some type of hoist, or they should have some type of body belt system, or even like a backpack of some sort. And then overreaching. We say that anytime an employee is overreaching is if their belt buckle is extending outside of their outside the outside rail of the ladder. So that is an overreach at that point. I did forget my black belt. I do understand that brown does not go gray. The 4-to-1 rule. This rule applies to all extension ladders. I have had a controlling employer get cited for this because their subcontractor was using a ladder at an improper angle, and it was a plain view hazard. It was in the middle of the parking lot, and our superintendent should have recognized that the ladder was at an improper angle. 4-to-1. So for every 4 foot of rise, you're 1 foot away from your structure. Typically, unless you have like T-Rex arms, typically if you're standing at the bottom of your feet and you extend your arms back, you should be able to either touch or grab the rungs. That's about an appropriate angle for an extension ladder. Ladders, when used for access, must extend 3 rungs past the landing surface and need to be tied off to prevent accidental slipping or sliding. I have climbed, so when I first started, my first account was 8 different roofers called Indianapolis Roofer Safety Group, and I had to climb 60-foot extension ladders on top of all those warehouses at Mount Comfort and shit. And so my very first one was a muddy day, and going up wasn't that bad, but I got to the point where the 60 foot, they start really wide, but as they go up, they get really narrow. And so I got to the point, and people had already been up, I had ladder lines of mud, because I kind of had to stop. So getting up and on wasn't the bad thing. So I did my audit, and everything was good, and then I got back to the edge, and you know how you ever see Bear Grylls, don't look down? Like he says, it tells the celebrities, don't look down. But you get to the ledge, you grab it, you look, you just have to step back. And so we used to call that initiation. These guys have gotten away from using have you climbed a 60-footer? Would you? Don't be a pussy, Dave. So we call it initiation now. We used to call it initiation, and we also tell our guys, listen, if you're not comfortable doing it, don't do it. because some people just are naturally afraid of heights. But it is an experience because ladders are an exemption. There is no fall protection required on that. Okay, ladders must be inspected daily or at least prior to use. Metal ladders bent easily must be inspected immediately if it tips over. What's the problem with this picture? We're welding next to gasoline. But I will state this. Anything, if you guys have do not use tags, even if you're not using scaffolding, if you just carry those scaffold red tags, and if you have a defective tool, cord, or even like duct tape with Sharpie, do not use. If you tag something out that's on site that you know that is damaged and OSHA comes on site or whatever, that is almost like an invisible, like magic invisible cloak for those pieces of things that you tagged out because they cannot then cite you for that because you have identified that it's hazardous or there's a defective part and you label it do not use. So people should be able to read that and should be able to. Signs, signals, and barricades are your friends. Use two hands. Okay, so like people have power lines, pay attention to those. People have different preferences of climbing a ladder. Jeff, if you're climbing a ladder, are you using the rungs or the sides?
Please run.
Not a wrong answer. I'm also a rung guy. If I fall, I want to be able to grip on that motherfucker. What? You're a side guy? See, I don't know. I don't like it.
Side guy.
Going up, side's going down.
All right. Is this correct?
Nope.
Actually,
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So these are the cleats, right? So we throw the cleats in, flip them up. That's for the ground or dirt or any type of soil. If we're on concrete or another hard supporting surface, we would flip those feet around and that safety feet would be applicable. I get everybody on that. And then your instructions will tell you exactly how to use that. Is this correct? It is. Because it's less than 6 foot. That is obviously not correct. Not correct. Definitely not going to make it very far on that. If you're at a facility and then the fixed ladders are damaged, you need to make sure that that's notified. Pole covers. This is not acceptable. Why?
Over 2 inches.
Over 2 inches of hole. It's not fully sheathed. It's not legal. It's not secure. It's not labeled. All that stuff. Warning line systems. That work?
No.
Okay. Now I'm done. That is the presentation for today. Let me just see. Electrical safety. So I want to talk about just a few things, just real quickly, just because I said I'm going to talk about these and you sign out. Electrical safety. Anytime we're on house power and we're plugged into a circuit that's on a circuit breaker, we have to have an external GFCI, a pigtail, a 3-way. Okay? Anytime we're on temporary power that's already GFCI'd, you can continue to use that system. Make sure your extension cords are construction grade extension cords. I'm pretty certain that that's not an issue for you, but I get a lot of guys going to Walmart to buy their cords. They're buying those like really thin green or orange ones. Those just aren't acceptable, right? So we need to use construction grade cords, and if there's damage to those cords, we need to replace those cords or fix those cords. You are allowed to have a qualified person, not a certified electrician, a qualified person replace the ends of either the male or the female end of the plugs per OSHA. Some owners do not allow that, but it is allowable by OSHA as long as it's done by a qualified person. So if you have a damaged ground pin, you can clip the end and install a new end on that and be compatible with OSHA. Silica is a hazard for, so people that are getting silicosis are people that are working foundries, mining, limestone, fabrication, those types of things. I haven't heard many masons getting exposed by silica, but you need to be aware of that it's a new rule, it's out there. We'll help you get compliant with like the hammer drilling and things like that, just in case. And it can cause cancer, it can cause silicosis, which is a form of cancer, I believe. And the main point of entry is obviously inhalation. So if somebody is doing a bunch of grinding or cutting near you, you need to pay attention to that cloud of dust and maybe remove your personnel from that area or notify the controlling employer of potential non-compliant act by the masons or by the concrete guys, because they should be using integrated water delivery systems for curb cutting and things like that, et cetera, et cetera. Accident incident reporting, we talked about that for the SOPs, and then the last one is reasonable suspicion. This has come up. Well, do you have that PowerPoint? How much time we got? 5 minutes? 5 minutes. If you suspect someone, okay, first let's start with this. If we have a subcontractor that we think's on alcohol or drugs, you make sure that the subcontractor handles that themselves. You do not want to get into the business of, hey, I think you're high. Okay? I want to make sure that if you think you can tell them, hey, I want John removed because it's possible that he's under the influence. And the reason is this and this is, but I want you to, you need to have the subcontractor make that decision. If there are people, then we can use reasonable suspicion. And you always want to take two people, two supervisors, or two people to confirm the same suspicion. I think you're drunk because I smell booze. Do you smell booze, Bob? Yeah, I smell booze. Okay, we're gonna take you to the occupational health facility. We're gonna get you tested out. Because what you can do is you can get into the discrimination case really quick. Like, I discriminated against you because you're an engineer, okay? Or you have dimples. Cute dimples there, bud. But I discriminated against you because you have dimples, okay? And you can take a discrimination case against me, especially if I was wrong about my reasonable suspicion. I think you're high because of whatever, but I need to have confirmation. So this is a very, very delicate dance with the whole like reasonable suspicion, okay? So we need to be very careful on that because you don't want people to bring discrimination cases against you because of what you said or how you said it. I'm obviously not the best person to be doing this because my mouth just. Making decisions, signs and symptoms of use and abuse. I think most of us know what those are. Sometimes it's very obvious, and if it's very obvious, you still want to have that second person involved. But we've had a guy sleep in his car at the site, wake up the next morning still drunk, and he's stumbling, right? I mean, at that point, you have to say something. You have to stop that work from happening. But that's also very obvious. We all have technology in our pockets. It would be great if you see someone stumbling before you even walk up to him, go ahead and just film some of his acts or his actions. Or even while you're talking to him, film that. Because then you can hear the slur. You can hear that. And if somebody does try to do discrimination, you have a kind of a golden ticket in your pocket. Those are things that are suggestions. Go to the next slide.
Aren't we a recording consent state though?
So yeah, you probably are. In Indiana, we're not. We're a one-party state. Sorry. So in Indiana, I can record you, and I wish I would come with that Dimples thing earlier. That would be great. Me and Dimples are talking. Like I can record our conversation in Indiana, but there's not in Missouri. All right, fine.
We don't work in Missouri.
So wait, what now?
There's a one party. There's different states that have one party or two party authentic. Our state, I don't know exactly how it works.
One or two party recording consent.
So in Indiana, I can talk to him and we can have a conversation and I can be recording him the entire time and that is admissible into any type of legal proceeding. In other states like Missouri, I have to tell, hey, listen, I'm recording this conversation. Is that okay? Yes or no? And then if it's not, then it's not admissible. I don't know how that works for video though.
I'm pretty sure it's the same deal. It's
That's the reason why privacy is
a different type of recording.
In public, yeah. All right, well, be careful on that. I'm not an attorney, nor am I a.
Do we have a drug policy wrote in our contract for like our subcontractors in California?
I'm sure it says not to be under the influence. There's a line item that almost certainly says that, even just the standard. You guys don't use AIA, do you?
We had court cases
Okay.
for our general, but that's just a general.
Sure.
You know,
Okay.
we don't use them for ourselves, no.
That's what I'm asking. Okay, yeah, stay away from the AIAs because they're too fair for that.
They're way too fair.
So we want to make sure that we have very strict language in our contracts that kind of specify what we're wanting out of them, the subcontractors, rather than giving them this whole fairness platform. Okay, it's not a fair world.
What about the problems with state legalizing marijuana use?
Yeah, people ask me that all the time. So you have the right to not allow people to be under the influence of marijuana on your project, but marijuana stays in your system for 2, 3, 4 weeks, and so drug testing those people is becoming a pretty big liability issue. There's a lot of folks going away from. In fact, we encourage not to do random drug testing at this point to our clients.
We just do pre-employment.
Pre-employment and post-accident.
Post-accident, pre-employment or pre-job site,
Sure.
and then not random.
Not random. Stay away from randoms because of the legality issues, and plus, anyways, I mean, there's a lot of medical use out there. There's a lot of different things that,
But we can just basically say, hey, you can't go out and jump out at lunch.
don't be high. And on our site-specific safety plan or our site rules and orientation, we outline that. So they sign off that they know that they can't be high. And it's pretty obvious. I mean, you smell like weed, dude. Like, the fuck? You know, you can tell people when they're, I mean, or like, I don't care what you
Sick
do.
man.
Huh?
You sound like Pat.
It's no different than drinking, you know, drinking's legal, but you're not allowed to drink on the job.
That's right.
Use of marijuana is no different, or any other drug, for that matter.
So it's very, there is whole symposiums, there's like education happening all over the country, there's webinars that you can actually go in, they'll talk to you about this, it's a very in-depth conversation, but in general, my thought is, if it's more like reasonable suspicion, I smell it, I see it, there's something off, but it needs to be pretty, demonstrable, meaning I need to be able to emphatically tell someone this is why I'm getting this person drug tested. So actually I didn't do it because I assist out, but I mean,
Back up to the last slide.
Yeah, I can see it too.
What's the basis of that, or what's the?
oh man, 2005 statistics, I believe it was blue VLR.
You're saying 53% of the people's.
No, go positive. So this will add up to 100%, or at least it should, 9, 20, 27.
Oh,
I'm keeping you tested positive, or something.
So marijuana is the number one. I mean, if you're testing positive for cocaine, you have a problem because it gets out of your system in 2 or 3 days. Okay? Opiates,
You work
same
really
thing. Hell of a work. Amphetamines, PCP, and then I gotta go. But have you guys seen the Pharmacopoeia on Vice? It's a really cool series on hallucinogen drugs and antidepressants. I learned about benzos and barbiturates, which I guess are not even available in the United States. People just don't have access to that anymore. Employee can get a copy of any results, speak to their medical review officer, request a sample be retested at their own expense. Next one. Refusal to submit can be considered as a fail. Next one. Oh, this is Jay would be better to speak about it. Addict. Any questions on any of this? So what we'd like to do is we'd like for number one, I'm gonna you have all your business cards, a bunch of them. I'll pass around Dave's card. You can get my number. I have my cards in the car. I just didn't bring them in. I want you guys to understand that we're a resource. Now, what we're gonna do is to start. We're not gonna just start. If people call us and there's a bunch of research, we'll get approval from somebody like Jeremy and say, hey, is it okay for us to do that? But at some point, maybe we'll get to the point where there's a time where we can just kind of go on and on. But for right now, if you call us and we have some significant work to do, this is Dave's, we will get approval to do that work. But I really encourage you to call us with questions. Because if you send us a picture or a text message that says, if you send us a text message that says, hey, what do you think about this? We're not going to bill you for that. Like, we're going to give you an opinion or a recommendation on that. But like, unless we have to do actual research and it takes us 5 minutes, we're not like attorneys where we're billing like 5-minute increments. Okay? Is there any attorneys? Are we an attorney? So we're not billing like 5-minute
Did I
increments.
piss you off in some manner?
Well, you seem to be dealing with contracts law. I didn't know. But just know that we are a resource for you. Our company name is Safety Resources. We try not to be just the robot safety guys. We try to have an actual conversation about things, and we can work around certain circumstances. Oftentimes, we can make owners and clients happy by just providing them with kind of a wall of documentation. Our site-specific safety plan, like you saw, is 15 pages long. If your current site-specific safety plan isn't substantial enough, maybe you supplement that with ours or something along those lines. But moving forward, I just want you guys to know that hopefully you'll be seeing us around on some of your projects, but definitely we're going to be kind of integrating with, working with Jeremy and Troy and those guys moving forward. So doing some more training as well.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
You guys did a rigging certification for us. So if we had a rigging deal where we needed help to size rigging, is that something you guys are still going to do for us?
Chris is our only CIC
Okay.
rigging expert, and so he would be able to help you out with that and the decision, but as a consultant, we only make recommendations. Any other questions?
So this is more for Procore. So what are we gonna do now? We're gonna have them go through our Procore safety docs and put theirs in there? Or how do we wanna do that so we can start filling out the docs on Procore? Cause I just looked through it a few minutes ago, we had some in there.
We've got some docs in there, but the way they've been set up is all yes, no, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of space for comments.
And then you guys are familiar with Procore.
We're familiar with Procore.
Do you guys know how to build docs in Procore for automated?
Yeah, I mean, there's forms. It's the Procore system allows us to build our own customizable forms, and we have some of those already created.
So would it be easier for us to let them be like a contractor to build stuff in ours for us? Get Tracy in here, so that way they could look at them and build them for us to start using?
And that would be something that you can start with on.
Yeah.
What do you think? And go through what we have now, just.
I mean, all it is a document.
Right.
It's a document. And we have the documents are done. So like even if you had somebody that you wanted to pay, instead of paying us the money that you pay us per hour, if you had someone internally that is good at building forms, we could give you our intellectual property, and then you could then create that form for them. That's also an option for you. And then we would just bill on the intellectual property.
Yeah, we need to kick that around a little bit.
Are you talking about any of the documents we went over today?
No,
Go ahead.
We're just talking about like JSA.
Thank you. Because I wanted to ask Jeremy, when we had Adam's bunch, we had the aware folder, and most of what we're going over, job site audits, et cetera, if you wanted to still use hard copy are available, but things are restructured or revamped a little bit. Are we gonna have like maybe a cheat binder with just, because you get preoccupied on one thing, I'm like, man, I forgot to do that on XYZ job.
Well, if you go into inspections now on
Mhm.
Procore under your job,
But that's just inspections.
no, but
I mean, kicking a job off, too.
Taking the job off.
kicking it off.
Well, it's got everything in there. It's got
Okay.
your daily GSA, it's got your site specifics, it's got everything in there.
Okay,
When you create a new one,
okay,
it tracks it all.
good enough.
So we've been working a lot in that last 4 months.
Yeah.
It's there.
That's what I wanted.
And a lot of those guys don't read the contract either.
We just haven't taken.
Well, I really appreciate your time. I hope it was entertaining, and I'm sorry that David didn't actually get a second time to speak. That's typical with me. So, any questions on the sidebar? I'm willing to have those, and then otherwise, thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. OSHA does not require people to be tied off scissor lips.
What?
OSHA does not require people to be tied off at scissor lips. But manufacturers, some of the manufacturers recommend it, and they have anchor points in it, and if they recommend it, then technically you're supposed to. So I fall on the side of I do not ever, because I've had a drop down or a roast down, big company had the same thing where somebody fell and they got injured because they were tied off in the lift and weren't able to escape the fall. So they have gotten away from requiring everybody to be tied off in scissor lifts. As a company policy, I would not go above and beyond OSHA. I would only require 100% tie off in scissor lifts if your client and owner requires it. But that gets very, and some manufacturers require further training. Yes.
Now what about boom lift?
Okay. Send a little bit of 100% tie off. 100%. As soon as you get in. Yeah, even if you're moving it at the ground level. And then the other good thing on that is they've been talking about you can't use 6-foot lanyards in the mirror. You have to use retractable because I'm a full rail all over it. But you guys count as good retractable. That kind of. Hey, I know we're from Indiana, but like we're so.
First time you go to anybody's house anymore, I'm pretty really.
We have to pay for our recycling. There are all these other states that.
Oh, I know. They want to charge you an arm and leg to recycle.
So we're downtown. We're right there, 12 West Vermont.
You guys from
right
the west?
near the Korean War Memorial.
I live in Danville.
So, I mean, we're not far.
Where were you guys? You're offset town.
I live on the east side, Holy Cross neighborhood. My fiance, I have a house in Browerville that I'm a landlord of. It's right now, but we live in Erie side, so like 5-minute bike ride to Sunday. Holy Cross. You know where Angie's List is?
Is that what he said?
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Angie's List, right behind that.
Okay.
So in that up and
I got
coming,
that.
Yeah, they're gonna walk down.
gentrified area.
We
We got
got
it.
car. He's done a good job of it now.
I agree. I agree. We got in 2 years ago.
terminal?
Yeah, see, I
$120,000
text you when I get
But our lots
I
haven't
know where,
sold right
I got
now.
an
They're
idea,
sold for
I know you did one.
Just the lots.
We'll be in one of
People are
the
building all over. The house next to us, we own all the land around the house next to us. Sold for 54. They put 150 into it. Sold for $360,000 for land. So we actually did good. The house is shit though. I'm so sick of the house.
What's that time you on?
But he's moving.
Yeah. I live in Danville on the west side.
You're moving though, right? Or maybe.
I have a place.
It might not be that we're out. We're trying to place some lawn right now.
Okay. Yeah. I always live at Heritage Lake, and that drive, just to get anywhere, sucks. Like, even go to the store is 25, 30 minutes just to the store. Now, screw this. So.
All right, David, back to casino.
Right, casino.
I appreciate it. How'd it go?
Great.
Sure, you gonna
Okay,
do
good.
a venture ride?
Yeah.
Found it to be extremely
Yep.
entertaining.
I gotta get the car back by 1:30.
Where do you want to leave?
Within 20 minutes, where are you gonna be?
I'm gonna be right here waiting for you.
You can't take it here.
If I go downstairs,
That's literally my only form of comedy. Like, I'm not a joke teller. I can literally just call people out and I give them some physical characteristic.
Hey, Troy,
Give them a nickname, and that's
you
how
let
I
Hector
do
know
it.
that when units are coming Monday, 8 o'clock, right here, 8 o'clock. Unload them. And everybody know we're gonna set right in front of
Well, good. The 3 hours for me went by very quickly, so that's always. In fact, I didn't get that.
So, Procore, what do you want to do? Do you want shop specific that you're working on? Like, can set them up, or do you want to talk about that at a later date?
I think we need to take a look at what we got and what we need before we can just
Start
cut
going.
somebody loose and start throwing stuff
Right.
out. So, I mean,
Well, because what we do one day, I can swing by your guys' office if you want.
You should definitely check it out.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then just show them what we got on there now. We're going to do.
Yeah.
They're not far from me at all. I say them. Sure.
The ping pong table.
You
You guys have a golf simulator?
guys have seen our game room? Oh, really?
We have a ping pong table and air
Josh,
hockey.
did you ever do that?
You guys have seen that?
Hey, see Devil's Chestnuts? The
Yeah,
food
this
system?
was just,
I finished it up while we were doing lunch, and I printed it to PDF. I still need to write up the change bulletin, and I'll get it to you by end of day.
no problem. Cause I wanna get it to them guys then.
yeah, I get you.
Thank you.
Hey, man,
What about you, brother? When you going out to,
day by day.
when you going out, you gotta travel next week?
Yes, I could be out in, Project Hall all next week.
Alright, cause, we gotta gear up for, everything.
Phase 2.
Yeah.
Let Ashley know when you think the dates are gonna be.
Yeah, I don't know, they ain't got the curb set.
Did you say 20 minutes?
At the most, yeah.
Alright, I got to look stuff.
And, if you would plug it in after next week, I don't have a lot.
It's
It's all
probably not gonna be till the end of September.
Dated check.
Don't shut the
It's
door.
on wing.
Okay.
I got to start loading stuff in my truck.
It's got that thing in the
Yep,
handle there.
okay, bye.
It's keeping it open.
I'm loading it right now. I'm loading it right now. I'm actually going from here to Myrtle Beach, baby. Just a lady friend. Yeah, started Wednesday. Yep. Yeah, we go early, a couple weeks early in case of snow days. So. Yeah. So what they'll do